We're ready to go. Good evening. Welcome and thank you very much for attending the meeting tonight. My name is Antoinette Peterson and I'll be facilitating the meeting and the discussion tonight. But before we start, I would just like us all to take a minute, just maybe close our eyes and bow our heads in remembrance of the people who are affected by these storms raging across different provinces in South Africa. And then I'll continue. Thank you. Thank you. Right, so I would like to confirm that this is a public meeting, but I think we'll treat it as a focused discussion with all our participants. But it is a public meeting for that forms part of the scoping phase of the environmental impact assessment for the proposed nuclear facility by Eskom. And I just want to emphasize once again that we're very early in the environmental impact assessment process. At this stage, it's all about understanding what are the issues of concern and how these issues can influence the terms of reference for the different specialist studies to be undertaken as part of impact assessment. So at this stage, no decision has been taken, and the decision maker or the competent authority is the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. So just to move on, I would just like to then introduce the team that will be presenting or responding to issues tonight. The applicant is Eskom, and from Eskom's side we have Gqeberha, and we have Sadiqa Tofi.
Good evening, everybody.
And WSP is the independent environmental assessment practitioner that's been appointed to undertake the environmental impact assessment. And the team is Ashley Strong, and she's the project manager and supported by Brian Hayes as the project director. Right, so moving on, just in terms of guidelines, I would just like to check if it's okay for us to present in English, and if you have questions or concerns, you are welcome to ask them in your language of choice. Is that in order with you? We can do translation if necessary. Okay. 100%. So we'll do the presentation in English, and then you're welcome to ask your questions in your language of choice, Afrikaans, English, or isiXhosa. And then when we have discussions, just be mindful that we would like to give a fair opportunity to all our participants to ask questions, to raise their issues. We're a fairly small group tonight, but in order to just move through everyone, I'm going to ask that you keep your questions to 2 questions at a time, maximum 3 questions, except if we see that there's no hands or urgent questions, then we can carry on. But I'd like to give everyone a fair opportunity to ask their questions. And then 1 person at a time, please work through me as your facilitator. And then also this meeting is being recorded as part of our public participation process proceedings. All the questions and comments raised will be captured in minutes. The meeting recordings will be made available on WSP's websites. There's 2 websites, including a data-free website, which means you can download the information free of charge. So, what are we discussing tonight? Sorry. So the presentation has been structured in sort of three main components. We're first going to deal with the environmental impact assessment process, the regulatory requirements. Then we'll hand over to Eskom as the applicant. We'll provide a description of the proposed project. And then WSP will again just share information about the specialist studies that are being undertaken as part of the environmental impact assessment, what preliminary impacts have been identified so far, and what the scoping phase recommendation is going forward, bearing in mind that it's a recommendation at this point, and that final recommendation will need to be evaluated by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, and then we can take questions and answers. I know a lot of you have seen the presentation before. Can I just check who has not seen the presentation yet? So quite a few people. Okay. So that is how we will roll with it tonight. And our purpose here is really our role is to listen. So the team may not be able to respond to all the questions, all the concerns, or address all of them. I think the main purpose is really for the team to understand what the concerns and the questions and the critical issues of concern are, so that they can make sure that all of those aspects are integrated into the terms of reference for the specialist studies, so that those issues can be evaluated and assessed, and the impacts assessed during the impact assessment phase. Sharing information, but most importantly, listening to what your issues and your concerns are. And then just want to share this slide, which you'll also see in your slide packs. Show a QR code that you can scan to register as an interested and affected party, but if you've completed the attendance register, you will be registered as an INAP in any case. And then just some contact details of the Public Participation Office, and then the comment period for the scoping phase has been extended to the 25th of May. So even if you leave after tonight's meeting and you have more questions or discussions with your constituents, you are welcome to still submit issues or concerns in writing, or you can contact the office and submit your issues verbally. And I think with that, I'm going to hand over to Ashley. Thank you very much.
Just use this mic, and I don't have to stand at the computer. Okay, so we are here to look at the new nuclear facility that is being proposed. We are looking at two sites, Tastepunt and Bantamsklip. The third site that was previously looked at as well in the Nuclear 1 EIA. Sorry, I think there's let me just stand here. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Well, okay, there is a little bit of a funny feedback, a buzz. The Danafontein site that was included in the Nuclear 1 EIA was authorized on the 11th of October 2017, and that site is neighboring to the existing site, which has been operated by Eskom for the last sort of 40 years or so. And we are now looking at another nuclear facility, so it would be then the third facility, which is either Tastepunt or Bantamsklip for 5,200 megawatts. Where the EIA has stemmed from is from three sort of main pieces of policy and plans, or from government, and that would be the nuclear energy policy, the national development plan, as well as the integrated resource plan. All three of these particular plans and the policies look at integrating nuclear power into the energy mix over the next years, and the IRP specifically includes 5,200 megawatts of nuclear power to be added to the grid by 2039. Right. So we are sitting in the green block, the environmental authorization. So we are busy with the EIA. We are working. The EIA does work together with the heritage permit. That is something that is running concurrently. Those two applications, there are two applications that have been required, one to SARA, the South African Heritage Resource Agency, and one through to the Eastern Cape Agency. Both have been submitted already, and the heritage specialist is working together with both of those authorities in this regard. What is not in our scope is the water use license and the coastal water discharge permit. They will be done post EA, should it be approved. But what is happening is that the specialist studies that are being done in the EIA process are required to include the studies that need to feed into those two processes. But we will not be doing those two application processes. Those two do need the EA before they can be looked at. Then there is a third process that is running concurrently with the EIA, and that is the nuclear installation site license. That is run and done under the auspices of the National Nuclear Regulator, and it is a standalone process that is running concurrently, and they will be having their own public participation process later on, and they will advertise that separately from our side. Okay, so in terms of the EIA process, it is a little bit different, well, quite a lot different actually, from the Nuclear 1 EIA. We now have the timeframes which are legislated. There are legislated timeframes for both the EAP as well as the authorities, and also the public review periods. We have, as we said, requested that extension of the public review period for the scoping phase, which was approved. So that has been extended to the 25th of May. So these dates here are a little bit off in terms of the program going forward. So we hope to submit a final, we have to submit a final scoping report to the department in the middle of June now, rather than the middle of May. So that's where we are, and then we will go from there. After that, they have 44 days to review that final scoping report and provide us with their decision on going forward into the EIA phase at the end of that 44-day time frame. And from that date of receipt of their decision, should they approve the final scoping report, we will have 106 days legislated to submit the final EIR. But as we did mention in the virtual meetings last week, there will be an upfront request for an extension of time for the public review before we get there, so that the department has time to consider that request. But instead, we're essentially hoping to submit the final EIA towards the beginning of next year, first quarter of next year. Public participation, that actually, this amount here is now very outdated. We're probably sitting at just shy or just over 12,000 stakeholders at this stage who have registered on the database. We are trying to be as open and sort of trying to use various different types of ways people can be involved through in-person meetings, virtual meetings, open, or should I say, hard copy reports in libraries. We've even got tablets with the documents on at various places. We've got tablets at our different offices for WSP. We've had them on the WSP website. We've also had them on the WSP data-free website, which is a very nice option for people who don't have money for downloading. They can download it on their cell phones or on their computers for free, and WSP picks up that tab. We also are required to consider all the input that we receive. To date, I think we've noted at least 1,800 specific comments to date that we're busy capturing. So we are capturing and we have to respond to each and every one of them. And I think what's very important here is that every comment goes into a comment and response report. They're responded to, and then that is all presented to the competent authority for their review as well. In terms of the permitting process, we are doing a full scoping and environmental impact reporting process, and the trigger for that is the number of, or the fact that we trigger at least one of the listed activities under listing notice 2, which are the triggers for the full process. If you do want to have a look at the full list of listed activities, they are outlined in Chapter 7 of the scoping report. These are what we have at the moment. We may add to them, we may remove them if we see that they're not relevant, but at the moment we do believe all of these are relevant. We might be adding a couple as well. So go and have a look at Chapter 7 for the description of these. And now I'm going to hand over to Sadiqa for a brief explanation in terms of the project components.
Thank you, Ashley. Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to give you a quick overview around how the plant operates and what the key components are that we'll be using to operate the plant over the lifetime. And this diagram is giving us a schematic overview of the plant layout and the major components that go with that. I normally start the presentation just to explain briefly the fission reaction, which is in the bottom left corner. You can see that. I don't know that is okay. But really, it's working on the principle that we're splitting a uranium atom. And that's called fission, is when you split the uranium atom. We use a neutron, and we're really working on the subatomic level to do that, where we split a uranium atom with a neutron. That process generates two important components. One, it generates a neutron. It splits the atom in two. The neutron that's generated impacts another uranium atom, and that splits it further. And that's what we call the chain reaction. So it's a neutron impacting on a uranium atom. It splits it, gives another neutron, and it splits the next one, and that action continues and gets controlled by the operators in the control room on how we manage the power level with that. The other important part is it generates heat in that process, so heat is given off, and that energy is what we use to heat water and to control that. So we heat water in the fuel around the fuel, okay? So the uranium is contained in the fuel assembly, where all the fuel elements are, and the reaction is contained within that. It generates heat, and that's cooled in the reactor vessel in water. And it's depicted by this purple diagram here, where the water is circulated to what we call a steam generator and returned back. So the water gets cooled off by the steam generator, returned to the reactor vessel, where it heats up again from the heat that's generated there. And that process is a closed loop process where the energy is generated and the heat is generated. The other important function of the steam generator, as the name implies, it generates steam. So it does cool. First of all, it cools the reactor vessel, the water in the purple circuit, but it also generates steam. The steam, which is in a separate cycle, goes around and turns a turbine, which turns a generator that connects and generates electricity that we get onto the grid. That's transmitted through the transmission lines to give us electricity. That water is also cooled off in the condenser, and that cooling and returns through to the steam generator, where it's heat again, steam generator turns the turbine, generates electricity. The other important bit is we also have what we call the turn cycle, which is the green part, where the water in the condenser is cooled off by the seawater that we have. That's an open system, and really water goes in from the sea, cools off the water in the generator and in the condenser, and return back to the sea. That's an open circuit. What's important from the cycle, there's 3 layers here of defense that we talk about. There's the primary circuit, the purple part, that water is not in contact with the steam that's generated in here. There's an interaction, there's no mixing of the water. And likewise, the seawater is not in contact with the water in the condenser. And therefore, the steam is also, the seawater is also not in contact with the radioactive water in the primary side, or the water that's in touch with the reactor. That's all controlled by the control room, as I mentioned, around that. This slide is just showing the same picture, but what it would look like on the plant itself. So there'll be quite a lot of buildings that we will see being constructed on the plant, and it will stay there and operate for the next 60 years at least. The first one I started is normally starting in the middle. There'll be a large reactor nuclear island. That's where the reactor vessel and steam generators and all the safety equipment are housed in. We call that the nuclear island. It's contained within a containment structure, which is about a meter thick reinforced concrete building. That you will see that there, and that houses all the important nuclear components and facilities within the nuclear island. Attached to that will be the power block just below that, and that's where the turbine is housed, as well as the electrical generators. The generators, as I've mentioned, it hooks up to the electrical plant where the transmission lines then transmit the electricity out through the grid, and you'll see these through the big towers that we have coming out on that. Attached to that will be additional infrastructure that we will have inside. We are not planning to use any municipal water supplies for our fresh water needs on the plant. Therefore, we will be constructing a cooling, for our cooling water, we'll be installing a desalination plant, and that should take the dependence away from the municipal water supplies around that and become self-sufficient in terms of the plant's fresh water needs. We will also be, during construction, be having a temporary ocean works, that what it's called on the slide, but there will be a permanent structure in place around taking the intake and outflow for the water needs for cooling. As I mentioned, we will be cooling that water, and we're looking at the impact around that in terms of the spoil and where that will be managed and controlled. The other important bit is we will also have additional facilities on the plant. The first part, on this side, we will have office buildings, chemistry laboratories, and other facilities to help maintain the plant and operate the plant over the life of the plant. So those will be new structures that you will see on the site, as well as waste storage facilities. Those are temporary in nature, and they're really just there to manage the nuclear waste that we will be generating on the plant. They will be transported through to the Valpits facility in the Northern Cape that we have, and that will be under escort through a safe route where the water gets transported through to the Valpits facility, which is the only licensed facility for low and intermediate level waste in the country at this moment in time, and also the designated facility at this moment until they just received their license to operate in terms of Nirwadi, and they will be constructing a centralized interim storage facility for fuel, for keeping fuel at that site. Okay. What we're showing with this slide is important from a perspective that we have not yet chosen a specific reactor design or a specific country or a specific vendor that will provide us with a nuclear power plant in Eskom. We've looked at all the parameters of different plant designs and put together what we call an envelope. It's really upper and lower limits where we are defining for a plant that we would operate in Gqeberha, in Eskom. It needs to operate within certain parameters, minimum and maximum temperatures, as an example. What we're looking in terms of the output and what certain deliverables are that we want to see. And those are defined in what we call a plant parameter envelope. It's not unique from our approach. It's an internationally accepted practice. We other countries do the same in terms of defining a parameter of criteria that you use in this process, and your vendors are expected to meet the requirements that's outlined in those enveloping items. in that. If they fall within the parameter envelope, the plant design would meet our requirements. If not, then we would probably not be looking at that specific design in terms of that. And that's quite well defined in Chapter 4 of the scoping report. And then this last slide that I have is really just talking around just the typical safety features that we're looking at in terms of Eskom and how we will manage the plant. We are looking for plants that are using increasing use of passive safety systems. And really, the passive safety system is where you don't use electricity to perform certain functions. You're relying on the forces of nature and limited human action to do a specific function. So gravity, as we know, pulls water and items down. So we're looking at elevating certain tanks and components. So when you need the water, gravity would feed it and supply that system. And there are those type of designs that is evolved that we're looking at in terms of the plant design. It's more modern around that. We're also looking for a simplified design. And the simplified design, the more complex the plant is, the more stuff it will be there, the more stuff is likely to break. We want it simple, we want it easy, we want it simple to maintain, simple to operate. So we're looking for fewer systems and components in terms of how the plant is designed and put together, so that it does provide us a simplified means of achieving our objectives around that. And then important concepts that we have is what we call defense in depth. So defense in depth is an issue where you put multiple layers of defense in the process to protect the assets that you have in the design philosophy. So, for example, if I use this facility as an example around it, to prevent intruders from coming through, we put a fence on the outside. It's the first layer of defense to protect us from not getting other people in. We have alarm systems installed. That's the second layer of defense to really just help us identify what is there. The building itself is secured. Other instances, you would have burglar proofing installed and the like. Those are all different layers of defense to achieve a defense in depth concept around that. So we use that in the design of the plant to make sure that there's multiple barriers of defense in the layout of the plant. Okay? And then an important part is what we call redundancy. So in redundancy, we're looking at doing the same thing or the same function with multiple sources. So where we would have one pump delivering a certain output, in terms of redundancy, we put 2 or 3 pumps with the same capacity to do the same. So if the one breaks, there's another one that's able to do it. We also look around a pump that normally has electricity to supply it and turn it. A different means is using steam to drive the pump. So that's a redundant means of achieving the same objective using 2 different forces to drive the pump to give us that objective around it, or air and the like. And then another important item that has emerged in days of today gives us that example. The plant needs to be robust against external events. It needs to be strong, it needs to withstand extreme weather conditions and changes in the climate. So those are one of the key items that the plant requirements is that we've asked for in what we're looking at is that robustness for the plant to meet quite strict environmental conditions, like the seismicity or earthquake protection, strong winds, and the like. So those are important items in there. And then just the last item is an item that we call the low core damage frequency. Core damage frequency is really just a measure of damaging the fuel, and that's measured in millions of years. And what we're looking at, the probability of an event happening, that figure needs to be as low as possible from us. So all the designs, there's a certain low core damage frequency, and what we're looking at in terms of this design is a lower number within acceptance standards of what we're looking for. Ashley, thank you. I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, Steve. Right. So now we get into a little bit more on the scoping report itself. So Chapter 6 of the scoping report is where we discuss the alternatives that we've looked at in the scoping phase. We did look at 2 site alternatives in the scoping phase, Buttonsclip and Taspit. We have looked at the energy alternatives and put in quite a considerable discussion on pros and cons and a discussion on those: coal, gas, wind, solar, hydro, and nuclear as well, looking at those different alternatives, and then highlighting some of the design alternatives that we've looked at. And some of these will be adjusted and looked at in more detail resulting from some of a lot of the comments that we've been receiving over the meetings that we've had so far. And then, of course, the no-go alternative, which will also be looked at in more depth in the EIA. That is in Chapter 6. In Chapter 11 of the draft scoping report, we've nominated and outlined the preferred alternatives to go into the EIA phase. And those I'll look at the end of the presentation, but those would be then required to be approved by the department for the EIA phase still. The localities are Bantam's Klip, which is the site that sits just down the coast from Pearly Beach and Gansbaai in the Western Cape, and then also Tacepint in terms of the one here in the Eastern Cape between Oyster Bay and Cape St. Francis. We have commissioned a number of various different specialist studies. All of them have been involved, well, most of them have been involved in the scoping phase. I think that just the economic and the tourism have been identified through the socioeconomic scoping reports that need to be detailed in the EIA phase, and then the site control, emergency response and beyond design will come in the EIA phase as well. All the others, and also the offset section. But all the others have been involved so far in the scoping, looking at baseline and also the identification of preliminary impacts on both the Bantam's Klip and the Tacepint site, as well as putting forward their current preferred site for going into the EIA phase. We've also got some sensitivity maps in now, which is something that wasn't required a number of years ago with the advent of the DFFE screening tool. We now need to do site sensitivity verification, which I believe is actually Chapter 9, but it is also discussed in Chapter 8 of the scoping report, but the sensitivity maps have been pulled together, and these will be updated as we move through into the EIA phase as well. So this is for Bantam's Klip. You can see that there's quite large, I don't think this jobby is working anymore, large nature reserves and protected areas up here with Ogalis National Park, and also sections over here, and these big red areas are critical biodiversity areas. This is the Tacepint area. We do have a protected area down here to the east of the site, and then also some critical biodiversity areas, which are the red and the green. We also have the heritage sites, and we also note the current what's it called? The protection, the cultural heritage landscape as well. Yeah. We have the specialists have been looking into biodiversity, socioeconomic heritage, visual, physical environment, health and safety, as well as various long-term issues such as waste management and climate change. In the EIA, previous studies will be again reviewed and updated, the ones that they've done in the scoping. We have some additional specialist work that needs to be done and additional field studies so that we can get some winter surveys in. We will then also re-look at those preliminary impacts that have been identified and assess those in more details. And one of the additional things that comes in the EIA phase is that detailed addition of mitigation measures and recommendations and monitoring measures that comes in the form of the environmental management plan. As I said earlier, the specialists were asked through their baseline work, both from reviews of existing information and their work that they've done in the field over the last number of months. Starting last year, a number of these specialists been back out into the field to re-look and see if anything has changed. We were asked them to identify a preferred alternative, which they did. We put this all together and summarized it as follows. 4 studies picked Bantam's Klip as their preferred. 2 studies did pick Bantam's Klip, but also did note in their text that Tacepint would be suitable. 8 studies picked placement and 11 studies were neutral. In terms of our overall recommendation for the site that needs to go through into the EIA phase, we also looked at the requirement for an alternative to be reasonable and feasible and viable. And for this reason, we also had a look at the current NNR readiness of both sites from Bantamsklip and Tasman point of view, with Tasman being far more ready and further down the line in that particular regard. We also had to have a look at where the grid integration sits, even though it is there's still a lot of work to do on both sites. There is a considerably more amount of work to do on the Bantamsklip site in terms of where the transmission network would need to connect to the national grid. So in terms of looking at the two, Tasman does look like the more feasible and reasonable and viable alternative, but as we said, this is still for the department to either agree with or for them to come back and request an alternative. So we will have to wait to see if they agree with that or whether they will want us to look at both sites in the EIA. I think it is good to note that Bantamsklip is not considered fatally flawed, and we do believe that in future it would be a future site, but there is still a lot more work to be done on that site at this stage. So that's where we end, and that is all outlined in Chapter 11 of the scoping report, if you want to go and have a look at that in more detail. And I think then this is the same QR code that we had in the beginning. So if you haven't necessarily registered, although you have automatically registered with your name on the attendance register, but there are some of the other details that you can use to get hold of us. And back to Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. Can I just check? Oh, you're going to run with the mic. Thank you. So we're opening the floor for questions. Thank you to our presenters for sticking to the time frames. The floor is yours. Thank you, sir. Please. Dumisile.
Hello. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dumile Damani, and I work for a government department which is cooperative governance and traditional affairs in the province. And fortunately, in my area of operation is Sarabatman district as well as the Nelson Mandela Metro. It's not like a question per se, rather than asking if colleagues can indicate that this presentation has incorporated the inputs that were made in the online meeting, if that is the case. And then maybe your expert advice as far as the public participation is concerned. Not only for this particular project, but in general, because the experience in the province is that when developmental, at first the premier in 2018 required that the COCTA as a government, as a government department, must develop a provincial model that will look at the issues in the province, like oil and gas development in the coast, in the eastern part of the province, and those and that coordination was done, but most of them are met with resistance, not resistance as in like burning tires and all that stuff. And the key issue is public participation. It's always an issue that if it's done, it's not done correctly. So how I wish that we may not fall in that trap, if I may use that word, of of not putting our ducks in a row and making sure that all the sort of loopholes are sort of sorted out so that the project that is intended to sort of increase sort of like development in the province is not challenged on the basis of public participation only.
So how thorough is the public participation being done? And the other question, your first question, was whether the issues raised online are already reflected in the presentation delivered today. I'm going to give to Ashley. Thank you.
So we haven't included those in the presentation itself, but what I can do is I can confirm that we have already captured all those, specifically all those questions from the 2 virtual meetings that we have had from the chat are already being pulled over into our comment and response report. In fact, I think one of my staff members did it on Friday already. We have got the recordings of the meetings, and those will be obviously captured in minutes, which will also be pulled through into the comment and response report. So we have taken note and already recorded all of those comments. So that is definitely there. But this has been the standard presentation that we've been doing since the 1st of April, just to give people sort of the high level sort of key points of the scoping phase. But all the detail is going to be in that comment and response report that is included in the final scoping report. In terms of the public participation process, we really hope, we believe we're ticking all the boxes. We definitely have done many meetings. We did a whole week of meetings in the Western Cape from the 7th to the 10th of April. We were here in the Eastern Cape about 2 weeks ago doing meetings around Oyster Bay and Humansdorp and St. Francis Bay. We've met with we've already met with one of the First Nations groups. We have a lot of, during the course of that meeting, the beginning of that, we were, I know Gary was one of them who requested this meeting today, so we've been able to add that to the list. And this week we have a number of different focus group meetings that we will be holding through the course of that. We've also had the virtual meetings that people have been able to attend for those not in their particular areas where we were in person. In terms of the public participation, as I said, we've already doubled the database from where it started, and making sure that we are informing people by SMS, by email, and taking on everybody's comments and recording those comments, and trying to respond as quickly as we can. We do get hundreds of emails every day, so we are doing all of that and definitely capturing all the comments that we have. We are almost ready to put up the recordings of all the previous meetings up onto the website, and then this meeting's recording will also go up. So for the public meetings. So, and I think if you can have a look at the public participation report, that is Appendix B, I believe, of the scoping report, you will find a detailed outline of what the public participation has included.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to add that if you have any suggestions regarding the public participation process, please feel free to share that with the team so that they can be considered, and especially if there are specific protocols that need to be observed. I'm thinking specifically of some government departments that the team needs to be aware of. Please feel free to share those with us. Thank you. Right. Next. Thank you, Melikaya, and then that gentleman, and then Andrea. Do I need to switch this one off? I'll switch that one off.
Okay, thanks. Good evening to everyone. My name is Melikaya Blani. I'm from the Eastern Cape Combined Environmental Forum. Mine is only on the issue that I understand that you had a meeting with the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay. And I would love to know if then will you be able to share the minutes of the meeting with the mayor of what was being discussed. And another issue is that of, we understand in terms of, for instance, you Medupi in Lipalale, there was a social chaos there, you know, in terms of its construction. So where is going to be the construction village be built with regards to this project to avoid what has happened in Lipalale? And another issue that I would like to know is that why Eskom is not driving for renewable energies instead of opting to move with the expensive projects such as this one. And the last one is from here in Nelson Mandela Bay municipality, those who are residing here, are we going to be able to apply for jobs, and what kinds of jobs is this project going to offer within the residents of the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, if I understand you correctly, the first question is that there was a meeting between Eskom and the mayor of the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro and Gqeberha, if the minutes of those meetings can be made available. I'm not sure where to direct that question. I'm not sure if you had a meeting with them.
Yeah, no, we didn't have any involvement for this project. Sorry, I think I've got a built-in mic, so I should be okay. So, from our perspective, that's a question that Eskom.
Yeah, maybe.
I understand it was between Eskom and Gqeberha.
Eskom and Gqeberha.
Yeah.
Okay. And can the minutes of that meeting be shared?
Yeah, and we had quite a lot of engagements. When are you specifically referring to, Mark? I just want to make sure I give you the right answer. And then. No, I want to know what time period are you referring to, because we had the mayor on site last week for a site visit from the Sarabadman district municipality, and it wasn't a meeting, it was a site visit where we had shown the site as a visit to Gqeberha.
The one that I'm asking is on the socials of the municipality, you know, and that it's all over the year, you know, and that the mayor was explaining about the meeting of this new nuclear build that is going to happen, and she was speaking about Eskom as well as Gqeberha, the memorandum of understanding that we have signed with the municipality. So that's what I'm asking. Thank you very much.
It's the Nelson Mandela Metro.
Yeah, no, I think that was around the skills development memorandum to be looked into with the Gqeberha municipality around that.
Okay, so I think that question then links to John. Do you want to add something?
Yes. Good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Just introduce you. Sorry.
My name is John Gqeberha. I'm a senior advisor of stakeholder relations for Eskom Gqeberha, the power station on nuclear build in particular. I think the meeting Melkai is referring to is what happened in February, on the week of February, 16 to the 20th of February. We've got a new management in the nuclear. So the new management at Eskom, especially in Gqeberha, was in a drive to introduce themselves. To introduce them, to introduce themselves to the key stakeholders in the region. So it's one of our responsibilities, or their responsibility as Eskom, to go to areas where Eskom has got operations or where Eskom is going to operate. So those sessions were in that domain. But what I can do, I can try and see if there is, from the discussions, there is information that we can put together and then make it available to the consultants, because it was a public meeting. Hence, you saw it on the website of the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. I think they've covered extensively CDC, Gqeberha Global Corporation. They've also covered our engagement extensively. So it's in the public domain, it's in their websites. So I can request the colleagues that put together that minutes or interaction to help us with the packaging of those engagements, and then give it to the consultants, because the consultants are the ones that will be easily, you guys will be easily getting in touch with. Thank you.
Thank you, Jongi. I think the next question was also, where will the construction village be? Has that location been determined? And there's concern around the all the logistical issues and at Medupi and Kusile, and how lessons learned from that process be incorporated should this process go ahead. And I think then maybe, Gqeberha, if you can also talk about jobs, how locals can apply. So what's Eskom's procurement process and the types of jobs that will be made available?
Sure, there's a lot in there. Thanks for the great questions. So the first one's about the construction village. Yes, so the potential construction village has been identified in this area. It is a location near to Humansdorp. I don't know the exact location, but that property has been purchased, and that would be where we would establish a construction village. How and what the functions around it would be, I think those would still only be determined at a later stage. So there is that. In terms of logistics, I think when we talk about Medupi and Kusile, there was a lot of time where we spent trying to say who had the mandate to build new capacity in the early days in sort of 2000. And Eskom didn't have the mandate for some time. And eventually a decision was made, I believe in 2004, to say that we are going to be in trouble in terms of security of supply, and we need to stop building. So one of the biggest lessons we learned with Kusile and Medupi was that there wasn't a lot of upfront planning. We went into it very, very quickly, and we learned lessons on the way. So, for example, we didn't have a construction site identified when we actually turned the first spade at Medupi. We hadn't looked at what road infrastructure was required to make sure that the amount of vehicles that we're going to site would cope with that additional traffic. So we only really started with the construction of the road after we were already busy with construction of the power station, specifically at Medupi. Kusile was a little bit different because Kusile is more of an established area. It's got a bigger zone to absorb. It had Bronkhorstspruit, Witbank, Middelburg. There are other power stations in the area. There's quite significant road infrastructure. So Kusile was a little bit easier from starting quickly and getting moving, but it did also have a lot of complications with it. So I think there's lots of lessons learned. We're now in the second time that we're doing this EIA for this area and Bantamsklip. So in the first process we did a lot of work and thought about what are the things that we need to think about. The public asked lots of questions, and we considered all of those questions that they asked, such as how would large components come in to get to site? What route would they follow? Are the bridges big enough? Are they strong enough? Would they need strengthening? What road would be used mostly to carry the construction workers in and the large loads? And there were issues raised about school safety, specifically on the road that goes past St. Francis Bay, and that it wouldn't be able to cope with additional traffic. So there was a lot of work done in that stage. The consultants need to look at that again and consider it and take it into account and include it in the environmental impact assessment. But I believe that there is, now I can say with certainty, there is a lot more consideration gone into the construction of this power plant compared to what we did with Medupi and Kusile. And then maybe straight into the jobs and job creation. And Medupi, I don't have all of the detail, but I can give you a sketch of how they did it. They looked at the zone and they identified a zone. And from my recollection, the zone in that case was 70 kilometers. And remembering Lephalale is quite isolated. It's not exactly the same as this. So they identified what they considered local, and then they also bussed people in to the construction site rather than trying to accommodate everybody close to the power plant. So the outlying areas, they made sure that they could bus people in so that you got a broader local benefit to the different communities. The skills that are required in an operating plant, operating and construction, it's a wide range, and I am aware that the consultants will cover that in detail, but it is from your local labourer, tea person, all the way up to a nuclear physicist, engineers. So it is a wide range of skills and a wide number of skills that would be required. I think there's a perception out there, we've heard from a lot of the people asking questions saying, oh, it's only skilled people, there won't be jobs for everybody, but there is a wide range of skills that will be required, because there's construction, there's civil works, there's engineering, and there's also the nuclear side of it. And then the last one is the renewables.
Yes, it's the question, why the decision to invest in expensive technology like nuclear?
Okay, so we base what we do and our mandate to do it from the Integrated Resource Plan. And in terms of the Integrated Resource Plan, they've identified a suite of different technologies. Firstly, looking at baseload technologies such as nuclear. They're looking at interim technologies. So when you transition from coal to renewables, you need something to transition, and they've identified gas as an option to transition. This is the graph from the Integrated Resource Plan. So the Integrated Resource Plan has its own public participation. I think it had 2 rounds of public participation and eventually was published last year. And in that process, they identified that this would be the mix going forward. So why does Eskom do renewables? We have dabbled in the renewables business, but we are not mandated to build renewables. So for a long time, we were mandated to do the larger construction projects, but not to do renewables. We have got a 100 megawatt wind farm in the Western Cape, and we have started looking at those coal plants that are shutting down. We started looking at putting renewables on those coal plants, so PV, photovoltaics, and wind. But our mandate is not necessarily to do wind and renewables. It is more for IPPs to do that. But we are getting into that process. But we are guided by the IRP, which identifies that nuclear is required, along with gas, which we're doing. And then we're also looking at some demonstration storage projects, that long duration storage projects that we will hopefully demonstrate and be able to construct in the future.
Thank you, Deandra. Yeah, thank you. I just have a follow-up question for the EAPS, and that is whether the construction village, does that form part of your environmental impact assessment?
So the construction village doesn't fall as part of the scope of the EIA. However, the construction village is going to be included in the assessment of the overall project. So although we're not asking for authorization for that village itself and the aspects that go with it, we are looking at the impact of that village in the various the studies. So, for example, traffic and social and economic, etc. So it will be part of that. Is it really part of the cumulative impact assessment as well? And then just one sort of further on in terms of the municipalities, the meetings that Jongi was speaking about are outside of WSP's scope. They were specifically related to Eskom and their stakeholder engagement from their point of view. In terms of discussions with local municipalities from our side, from the EIA side, we have had meetings with the municipalities earlier this year. I think Steve just reminded me it was Gqeberha and Overstrand. They did meet in January. This week we are meeting with Gqeberha and Sarah Bartman, and we are in discussions with Nelson Mandela Bay to try and get a meeting with them, but they haven't yet responded. So we are doing it from our side as well. And those minutes will definitely be in the various reports as we go forward. Okay.
Right, thank you. I'm going to move on to that gentleman, Andrea, is it Salim? And Salim, thank you for your patience. I'll get to you. Thanks.
Evening, everyone. My name is Wandi Gqeberha. I'm coming from Woma location. I'm a chairperson of one of the co-ops, Eskom Blackfishers Cooperative. Ma'am, if you do explain before I just arrived, pardon me, but just for me, for the information, so that when I'm going to call the meeting with my cooperative, I'll be able to answer this question. Because there is a VN that coming from the skippers of these boats, and a long SMSs that coming from the skippers of these boats, whereby they decampaigning about this sitting here. Yeah. But let me just chip in to the lady there. She said the land is being, or it's bought, if I hear her right. But the question that I have here is that how possible it is you can buy the land without EIA approved. I'm not sure, maybe she will explain to me. Yeah, ma'am. Again, when I look at the picture here, nuclear power plant, one in this SMEs or VN, there was something that make our members to be afraid, where we've been told that this power will be built inside the sea. Now, when I look at this sketch, maybe I don't see clearly. This meeting will help me. I can see that it is on the rock, big rock. Now, the fear that we've got in our cooperative was this thing was going to affect the species that we're busy with. So, can you give me a guarantee here that that will not be a case? Our species will be safe, and how safe it will be? Because the reason, ma'am, as I said, I'm coming from Woma location, where I think the last time I checked, the employment rate was 32%. Now it's going down. Now, if we are allowed to accept this, whereas it will affect our jobs and then it will go down again. So can you just give me a guarantee that it won't affect this? And then other things, my brother here covered, for example, the renewable and the jobs. But still, in the jobs, you know, we are just unfortunately from the people of Eastern Cape, whereby there will be these nice projects and big projects. But when the project starts, the contractor that's going to be employed will taking people from where you're coming from, because I know you cut my hand if the company that is going to be employed is coming from Eastern Cape. Cut my hand, the whole hand, not finger, the hand. And then those companies that are going to be employed, they will come with a lot of people. Now, the village that my brother was asking, it will be occupied by those people. Whereas there's the people here from Human Store up until here, and we're waiting for these jobs. And the reason I'm here, because I've got children that's supposed to be employed, not in other province, but in the province that they were born. I'm here to support it. Let me be open. I'm here to support this. But if only can cater us and the people of this region. Yeah, thank you. Ma'am, if there's anything I forgot, I think I'll come back again. Thank you.
Thank you. If you can just, Wandile, repeat your, I did not get your first concern that you mentioned.
Oh, my first concern was,
yes,
was the land that was patient, but the EIA is not there. So that's my concern.
Okay, but before you mentioned that, you mentioned something about the skippers and everyone sending
yes,
expenses.
Yes. No, I was saying there is a decommissioning of this gathering.
Okay.
Yeah, whereby the skippers are sent VN, sent messages to the crew, so that these people can see this thing that it will kill their jobs.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
but I said now because I look at this sketch here,
yes,
and then I saw this thing will be built on the rock, not inside the sea.
Yes.
But just give me a guarantee that the fear that they've got from the unknown, I catered for.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I've got you. Thank you so much. So I think from the first question, it's going to be Gqeberha, and then it's a joint response.
Thanks. So in the 1980s, Eskom carried out a study to identify sites for nuclear. And 5 sites were identified, and we started buying up the land for those where those sites are. So the one site is Danafontein, where Gqeberha is, and then there's one in Bantamsklip, which Ashley spoke about, and then this Tailspin site. And then when did we do the other EIA? When we did the previous EIA, some 15 years ago, we were looking to start and do construction on this facility, and it was then that we identified that we would need to make provision for a construction site, and we bought a property that would be suitable for a construction village. So you don't have to have an EIA approved in order to do land purchase, but it is an anticipation of making sure that we can go ahead with the project if all the other approvals happen. So this is not the only approval we need many approvals, but it is an anticipation to be able to go ahead with the project if we get all the approvals that we need.
And I think, Sadika, if you can just respond to just explain again where will this nuclear plant be built, and then what the impacts will be on the
Yeah. I also wanted to put that out. impacts.
The plant will be built on hard rock. That's absolutely correct. And I think if I just give an example of the Gqeberha site, it's not built in the sea, it's built on the land, on hard rock, where we will be going down to the foundation and build it on rock and build it up.
Just keep your mic close.
And build it up. So it's not built in the sea. We do take extraction of cooling water through tunnels from the sea and would be depositing that back there. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Use the mic for the...
Okay, yes. So in terms of the impacts, I think what is important to understand now at this stage is this is the first stage. So we, remember, we as consultants, we compile, first we go through the scoping phase we're in now, and then the next phase is where we actually go into the detailed impact assessment phase. So that is the phase, and during this phase that we now also we listen to fears and concerns people have, and also recommendations, or maybe we might have missed certain activities, or we might have missed certain communities for consultation, etc. So the EIA phase, the impact assessment phase, is where, if we look at the impact on ocean, now there are activities that's going to interact with the ocean. One, for instance, is the cooling. So they're going to take water in for cooling purposes and discharge back into sea. So what the specialists are going to do in the impact assessment phase is they're going to look at how is that affecting the marine life. To the extent of what will that water rise do, will it have any impact? And that is then where we make conclusions based on what we obtain from the specialists. And that gets presented to the department, and they make it, and we recommend based on the risks that we see, whether they are acceptable or not acceptable. And also what mitigation measures, what means are going to be taken in order to reduce risk, if risk is identified. If it can be reduced to a level that is acceptable. So that's the next phase that we will be doing.
And can guarantees be provided in
Okay, so the other one is also in terms of guarantee. We cannot, as I explained to you the process now, we cannot provide you now with a guarantee. So we rely on the outcomes that come in the next phase, the outcome that is based on what those specialists assess. So that is what will be done. Spoils is another, I mentioned spoils. Spoils is another one, which is in the actual construction, in this area where construction is going to be taken. They have to take down the upper levels, it's sand and rock, etc., to a certain level down, and then construct the platform. So there's going to be a lot of material that will be excess, and that material they are at this stage, and it's provided in the scoping report, volumes that are identified based on the plant parameter envelope, volumes of material that will have to be disposed of. Now there are various ways in which the material can be disposed of, and those are the alternatives that the specialists are going to assess. It can either be used on land, or certain components, because you've got a coarse components, you've got a very fine components. The finer components, obviously they cause a lot of sedimentation, so they're looking at to what extent they can use some of it in the construction purposes. Maybe they will be using it on land disposal, or maybe portions will be offshore disposal. But those are the alternatives that's been at this stage being looked at, and they will be assessed in detail in the EIA phase.
And then there's also a fear that this nuclear plant, the jobs will create competition also for the fishers, and that they may suffer further impacts as a result of the construction. So can guarantees be provided that will not impact the fishing job sector and their quotas negatively? And then if we can just also respond Must I stop? Okay, I respond to the question about what assurance can be provided that the contractors that are appointed will use local laborers and that there will be local skills development opportunities.
Right. Similarly, in terms of the social and the social economic aspects, we will these spheres have in previous engagements have been identified as well. So people have made similar comments. It's already been taken note of. However, your concern of this is also noted. So and we've got our social specialist sitting there. I was hoping that he was going to answer the question, but so similarly, there has been some baseline work has been done, but it hasn't yet been concluded. So, and we also at this we can't provide you guarantees now. We as the assessment practitioners, we assess the risks and we look at what are the mitigations if high or significant risks are identified, and ultimately we also present that, as I previously said, to the decision maker, the competent authority. They need to make the decision ultimately as to whether our mitigation measures are adequate in order for them to make a decision as whether they will authorize or not. But skills, yes, that I can't answer that. I think
while they're still deciding, I just want to mention that what Brian's mentioned about the assessment. So all those proposed mitigations or ways to reduce impacts or to manage negative impacts must be presented again to the public for input, and also during the next round. So this is not the last opportunity. So we take in your issues, we give it to the specialists, they will then go and investigate those issues, and then they come back and they present that information. So it's critical then for the fishers and for our stakeholders to come back and to look at those findings and to comment, to make sure that you are satisfied with the ways that they recommend negative impacts to be managed.
Yeah, and I also want to say what is important as these engagement sessions that are now being held and these focus group meetings that's also where we listen to those concerns and we start thinking as to what those mitigation measures can be. But you will be in a position at the next phase to then say, but I don't agree with this, you haven't thought of this, or this will not work. And we need to consider those aspects from a draft EIA to a final EIA. So that process will also be in two components: draft, reviews, final.
Thanks, Ashley. Just in terms of skills and the use of local skills, I think in terms of Eskom's normal approach, when we're doing mega projects, we will be relying on local skills and the use of local skills on the projects that's there. It's been the experience we've had with Medupi and Kusile, where we relied largely around making sure we do employ from the local community as our first tranche of skills that we're looking for in those areas. So that's the Eskom approach around the projects and the work that we're doing in that space. Okay. And Nadira, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that the consultants will also look at the examples of Medupi and Kusile, what lessons were learned, and hopefully some recommendations will come out of that. But also to share what actually was done, and I do think it was successful, but there will always be influx. When people know that there's a big project, there will always be influx. But there's definitely a concerted effort to make sure that there's a process to ensure that local labour is used. We had another project, the pump storage scheme near Ladysmith, and we've also got some good examples of how we made sure that we didn't negatively impact the locals that were actually living on the property that we then built the project on, but also the neighbouring areas, and making sure we use the locals before using imported labour.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
I see you all burning.
Anything to you?
Thank you. Evening, everyone. My name is Andrea, and I'm Environmental Manager at Gqeberha. We had the privilege last week of being hosted by Eskom at Gqeberha, so that photograph is very familiar. And I think there was a lot of information that was provided. Johnny, that's where I met you. And some of it was similar to what is proposed at Tastepunt, and I'm assuming Bantamsklip as well. But the big message I got out of it is that Eskom are only really talking about Tastepunt. And I think one must be cautioned in talking like that, because in a public process like what is happening for an EIA, where you're taking or assessing two sites and you're talking one is already being built, literally, it's dangerous, okay? And if one goes back to the previous EIA that was done, Danafontein, Bantamsklip, Tastepunt, all three alternatives were looked at, and surprise, Danafontein was authorized. And I think it was a surprise for a lot of people. So, yeah, I think that just sets the tone. What has happened to Danafontein? If we need 5,200 megawatts in, is it 12 years' time, why aren't we building there already? Can we be enlightened? One of the major concerns, and there were representatives from Gqeberha municipality at the site last week, and I think it's a very valid concern, is the impact on existing infrastructure, like your roads, your even power line infrastructure, sewers, stormwater, potable water. That infrastructure is already failing in that area. What is Eskom going to do besides building a nuclear power station there? Are they going to support the municipal infrastructure as well? And when is that going to be looked at in terms of the scope of this project? And of course the impact on communities. Then, okay, so we spoke about the integration of this into the existing infrastructure. Something else that I think concerns me, and perhaps it's outlined in a bit more detail in the scoping report, but we are aware that Eskom started purchasing properties 20, 30 years ago, maybe even up to 40 years ago. Now that's very preemptive. It preempts, and I think you mentioned, someone mentioned buying up land before you've even done your EIA. Now I think there is a level of understanding of that, but site selection was done a long time ago. Things change, technologies change, environments change, and why are we not looking at other sites along the South African coastline? We've chosen something that was selected 30, 40 years ago, and I think that's a big red flag. I understand that there are seismic studies and many others that have got to be done and years of data obtained in order to even make a site viable for commencing an EIA. We get that. But I think that question does need to be answered. Perhaps Ashley can put up that previous diagram which indicated we've got to have 1,000 megawatts, is it, by 2039, of which 5,200 must be nuclear. Yes, that's the one. 2039 is not very far away. Can we look at SMRs being placed on the existing or decommissioned coal sites? And is that going to form part of alternatives assessment for this EIA? One of the major differences between Gqeberha, which we noted last week, and this proposed site, and I think I'm speaking for Bantamsklip as well, but very little was mentioned about Bantamsklip. And that's why I said I think the decision has already been made by Eskom that it's Tastepunt, and that's dangerous. It's the seawater intake and outfall. So from that photograph that was shown right up front, it's clear that there's an intake basin, a sealing basin, and the discharge is a surf water discharge. So there are no pipelines as such involved. It's more tunnels and channels. Now, for Tasman, I believe that, and correct me if this is misunderstood, that the seawater intake will be one 6-meter diameter under seabed pipeline, intake pipeline, which will be between 1 and 2 kilometers out to sea, and it will abstract seawater 80, excuse me, I must just get my notes, 80 tons per second. It's a lot of seawater, and it's a once-through cooling, so it doesn't just come onto land and then get stored there. It cools what is needed to be cooled, and then it goes out via a plus minus 3 kilometer long discharge pipeline. Now, that's a lot of pipeline infrastructure. Understand also that there'll be blasting required to install those pipelines, especially if it's subsurface. So will the impact of blasting be assessed during the EIA? And that, of course, potentially has an impact on, well, very much so, on your marine environment and your fishermen, and there may have to be exclusion zones whilst that is happening, because you can't have people and ships in the area. Sorry. I have other questions, but I don't want to hog the floor, so can we leave it at that for now?
Yeah, we'll get back to you for the other questions. I'm just going to give Sally also an opportunity. So, yeah. But do you have so many questions? Maybe we can make an arrangement real quick.
I want to show you the front.
Right, so thank you for mentioning that first point. We take note of that. And then, will the EIA consider the impact on already failing infrastructure in the Gqeberha local municipal area? What will Eskom do to support that maintenance and maybe improvement and establishment of new infrastructure? And then also, I think the other question is, how will this project impact local communities, and how will that be assessed in the EIA? Let's keep it to that and give you I'm going to ask, I think it's a joint response from Eskom and
Start.
I think if you can start maybe about that. Thank you.
Okay, so again, I'm going to refer to the example of Medupi and Kusile and Ngula, because those are examples that where we've done large infrastructure projects. And in the Lephalale situation came up with a lot of the same kind of issues. For example, when we started construction, before there had even been the first construction worker on site, there was already, the sewage plant was defunct for that municipality, and there was sewage running into the river. We had a challenge to rectify that before we actually moved forward. So in that case, in most cases where we actually addressed the infrastructure, we built the sewage works and then we handed it back to the authorities. So there was a lot of debate about who's going to build the infrastructure and who's going to own it. But in most cases, the infrastructure was built by Eskom and then handed back to the municipality. Same with the road that was built between the upper and lower site of the Ngula pump storage scheme, built by Eskom, handed over to the provincial authorities. Water treatment plants were also included in the Lephalale situation. So we did address how the power station was impacting on the local communities and address that. There was also some intervention in terms of training, schools, and those kind of things that were looked at and addressed. So it doesn't mean that we will solve every problem that the local communities have, but obviously the consultants have to assess what impact we'd have, and then there has to be discussion between Eskom and the different authorities to determine what the way forward is. And that's exactly how it worked in the Lephalale area. There was engagement between Eskom and the local authorities, and agreement on how we would manage things. One thing we didn't manage in that case was a waste facility, and we transported waste from the power station 400 kilometers. So we had to. That's how we addressed that issue. It wasn't. We didn't build a waste facility, but in most of the other infrastructure issues, we did address where we directly impacted, or indirectly impacted as well, because we increased the communities. So that's just examples. It's not what is recommended. I assume there will be recommendations that come out of the environmental impact report.
Okay, I think while you've got the floor, if you can just also, the concern about the consideration of aging a report regarding the site selection. A lot of information has changed, circumstances. Why aren't other sites considered?
Yeah, so I think, Andrea, you answered the question yourself, because we did do these studies in the 1980s. The sites were identified, the land purchased. Reserving land on a coastal area that is suitable for nuclear is important. It's important for South Africa. It's not important for Eskom. It's important for South Africa that we identify nuclear areas that we can establish nuclear facilities on, and there was a comprehensive study that was done. Yes, there were some areas that were left out because of the political situation at that time, but it was a thorough assessment of where we could place nuclear facilities. And we have invested a lot of money into those sites in order to conserve them for a nuclear power station in the future when South Africa needs it. And I think nuclear is becoming more and more a requirement. It's a low carbon option. We are shutting down 8 gigawatts of coal by 2030. We are definitely going to run into a constrained energy system if we do not make sure that all of the options in the circle are addressed, and obviously hoping that South Africa does have economic growth, which means that the increased electricity demand will also increase. So it's all about how do we make sure that South Africa addresses security supply.
And then the SMR technology.
Yes. So Sadiqa can talk to the actual technology. We are doing a strategic environmental assessment for coal to nuclear. So we're considering all of our coal power stations, not just the ones that are shutting down in 2030, but all of the coal power stations in Mpumalanga, the Vaal, and the Waterberg. But the SMR technology has a while before it's ready. So it's not going to be able to address this need. But we are preparing ourselves for it. We're looking at it. We're doing the SEA, and then obviously whatever sites are selected in that process, we would then go into EIAs. The timing of that will really be determined by the readiness of the SMR technology. Is it commercial? Can it be licensed? There's a lot that needs to be put in place in South Africa to move the SMRs forward. I don't know if you want to add to the SMR.
I think you've pretty much covered it. The main constraint is the licensed plant, and there's a lot of construction happening, and sticking to what's in our policy imperatives around that. So the technology is not yet mature enough for us to deploy as part of the current need, but it is being looked at as the future plant that's on there.
So just a follow-up question then to the EP, just to make sure. So the SMR alternative technology will not be assessed in this EIA per se.
Yeah, so SMRs has not been assessed in this EIA based on the fact that there isn't actually the commercial, base at the moment, and the policy in South Africa to be able to license.
But it's in the plant parameter.
It is in the plant parameter envelope, though. So, yeah. So, but I think Sadiqa can explain the envelope idea, because I know that the...
Yeah, that's maybe necessary.
Yeah.
So the envelope really gives you minimum, maximum criteria around what the technology can look at. It does not exclude the SMRs, It'll just mean you need the footprint. We will need to look at that quite differently around what we're trying to achieve in that. But it defines the different parameters that the reactor design should be able to meet around that. But at this moment in time, the 5,200 megawatts, we're looking at confirmed large water reactor technologies that are able to meet that. And we will see if we can fit into that a suitable SMR for us.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to just respond to the question around the pipeline infrastructure and the impact of blasting. That will be assessed. I want to just ask if it's okay for us to continue for another 10 minutes after 8 o'clock. We started a bit late and I want to get to Salim, who's been patiently waiting, and I'm sure, Gary, you have a few questions as well and comments. So is that okay with everyone? Thank you very much.
So yeah, those are definitely going to be the pipeline alternative for discharge is and obviously intake and outfall are looked at. There's a marine ecology study that we're looking at that, as well as oceanography study. So they will be looking at that and the blasting, and the impacts for construction.
Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. My name is Salim Dolly, and I'm from an organization called SMEPE, Small Medium Enterprises, PE, which is a skills development network platform where we've got all small providers. But I think a lot has been said today, and I know we're in the scoping phase only. However, I think the biggest concern is localization, especially when we look at lessons learned, and I'll come back to that. One, the first question would be: has Eskom or the consultant looked at? I've heard about a skills development agreement. Have we done a skills match of the area itself? And if it's done, can we have a look at it, or can we then request it? Although it's early, we need to plan now already, because we have this experience with a Gqeberha. 20 years later, we had a complete mismatch, because how many of the local people are benefiting from what is happening in Gqeberha? Gqeberha is sitting on the doorstep of a location called Motherwell. So when they bring in a rig, for example, they will bring in people from Saldanha, a busload of people to come and paint the rig, as if there's no painters in Gqeberha, in Motherwell. Or people can't be taught how to paint. Yes, I understand there's regulations and processes, because you can't just paint, you need to obviously have a license to climb. So what I'm asking basically is, we can't say we have the NSDM plan, the National Skills Development Plan of 2030, and we're looking at normal skills development as to what is required when we do a plant of this nature. We need to look at the area itself, the culture. We understand that the Eastern Cape, obviously, the unemployment rate is low, and especially in the area that we're targeting here.
Sorry, so you're saying the unemployment rate is low. Do you mean it's high?
No, sorry, it's higher.
Okay.
So if you look at the area that we're targeting, for example, you will find that in Humansdorp and those kind of places, the schooling level is very low. So my concern is, yes, as much as we're only doing the environmental studies and that, we need to now plan already to look at how do we deal with those skills that will be required. Because, as I said, with Gqeberha, our experience was that they would say that there's no technical specialists or whatever coming from Port Elizabeth or East London or wherever. That's why they had to bring in welders, for example, from KZN and Joburg. Now, if we started preparing and training our people for that eventuality, it would have been a different ballgame, because, as I say, if we look at what is happening in Gqeberha, even today, what percentage of the region is our people are benefiting from what is happening in Gqeberha? Because we still see that, because the consultants that are appointed are not, we understand the skills are not in the Eastern Cape. So you will appoint a developer or contractor from KZN, and he will bring in his specialists. And what is left basically would be the laboring jobs also, only for the local people. So my question and my concern is just around that. As much as we are in the early phase, is Eskom or the consultant that's appointed looking at, yes, we look at, has there been a skills analysis done? As to look at what is the requirement, and look at how do we now already prepare in terms of preparing people for the eventuality. I mean, especially when you look at construction and engineering side, the welding side, for example. We don't have those training centers and things in the Eastern Cape. Especially in that area where that's targeted. There's zero, there's not one single institute in the Humansdorp area or the Gqeberha area accredited training facilities. Which means the infrastructure will have to be moved to the Nelson Mandela Bay. So that was my concern is can I ask that we look at, not just saying we have experience with Madipi and the area difference. There's a big cultural difference, and the Eastern Cape itself, especially this area, is way behind the national norms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think just noted. Maybe Sadiqa wants to have a.
No, Ms. Can
I have a mic?
Yeah. John, you want to?
Sure.
I was going to refer to John.
Okay.
Thank you, Antoinette. Thank you. What's her name again? Salim. Thank you very much. The points he has raised, I would say I'm glad or happy to let this team know exactly what he's saying. Our chief nuclear officer, through our HR manager, senior manager, they've began driving that. The stakeholder engagement that he has done, or he did in February, culminated to what we did again last week. Some or most of the issues that he has raised, the CNO and the HR team at Eskom have started to do exactly that in terms of scanning the environment. We will be working closely with CDC to assist us, because most definitely we are not here, we are not based here. So the experience for Eskom to get that kind of information will be coming from this area. I would really like to have your details, because our senior manager, procurement manager, Peter Delo, we are having a meeting next week precisely looking at the profile of the SMMEs in this area. How do we take that information, package that information, and understand what is it that is in the area? How can Eskom work together with organizations like yours? So I would really like to have your contact so that I can take it to the senior management at Eskom and see how do we work towards achieving that. Thank you.
So I just want to link that back then to the EIA. So this process that John Gqeberha just described, is that separate to the impact assessment, and to what extent will the findings of what Eskom is doing feed into the socio-economic impact assessment?
Well, if the findings are there, then they'll hopefully definitely be shared. But it does sound like things that the social impact assessment would anyway recommend needs to be done. So the social impact assessment would identify the levels of skills that would be needed, not necessarily all the skills, but definitely the level of skills and maybe how many of those different skills. But then recommend that a skills investigation is undertaken and that training facilities are looked at, etc., to prepare for that. So it really sounds like it's those mitigation measures to improve impacts, that may be positive impacts that they've identified, and those would be the mitigation measures that would enhance those impacts and make them better. So that's where it would link into the EIA.
Right, thank you. So, Gary, I know you didn't have your hand up, but I can see that. Oh, did you put it up? Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't see. It's because you are part of the naughties in front. So thanks for your patience. I'm going to give you the mic and an opportunity to speak.
Thanks, Tony. Is it Tony or Antoinette? Wow. Do we know each other well enough to call you Tony? Yeah. Tony, thank you very much, and thanks to Eskom and the WSP team. Just a couple of things. My name's Gary Cookmore. I'm assuming this is being recorded, so I represent WESA. We've been involved in this process for some time. My understanding of an EIA process is that it's meant to look at an objective and a serious study. So one of the things that I'd be cautious about is that the outcome is predetermined, and that the options that you're putting forward are window dressing because you want a certain outcome. Now, I think Andrea referred to that, and that question hasn't been addressed. And a couple of things. Just a couple of things for the record before we continue to my questions, if I may. Just, is the EAP aware that 4 meetings took place in this municipality or in this area between Eskom and selected parties in which the nuclear was specifically mentioned and specific technology was mentioned? So those were referred to earlier. And so those meetings took place with Gqeberha Development Corporation, that took place with the local municipality, with the mayor and her team, took place with the local business chamber, and then took place with the Gqeberha municipality as well with the mayor. Now, subsequent to that, then there's been several visits to Gqeberha, etc. So in that was specifically mentioned this project, and aspects of this project which differ in terms of information given to those meetings to which the meetings are here. And specifically that is 4,800 megawatt plan for Tasman and a 400 megawatt small modular reactor plan for Gqeberha. So that's the information we understand to be shared in those meetings, and then pertains to this process. The other thing is, when Gqeberha talked about the skills thing, in the previous process, I think it was a 70 kilometer ring that was put around Tasman. So that excludes this bay. And so in terms of what you would assess in your socioeconomic study, and you've heard from other speakers in terms of the likelihood is that people will come from the city to go and look for jobs there, and that the skills are based in the city because it's an industrial city. So you will have social conflict that you have to manage if you put a 70k boundary and you exclude Nelson Mandela Bay residents from it. And then on the spoil issue, the specific concern, and to the fisherman who's here, is around squid, and that the spoil will destroy the spawn of the squid. So that's, and I would imagine the noise impact too would have in terms of blasting, etc. What you didn't mention in terms of the sea structure there is a containment dam, or I'm not sure what you call it, a coffer dam. I don't know if you've seen the storm that's come through last week. I'd love to know where you're going to build a coffer dam that will withstand and what it will do to the Khoisan fish traps that are there at this point in time, because my understanding is that they're in the same area. Okay, so those are just some of the factual points which I just want recorded. My Three questions, if I may, relate to, the first is siting. So the key thing is the NSIL, you call it the NSIL. So the study done in the 80s in terms of where you selected 5 sites. So the issue in your scoping report that you refer to age. Age is not the concern, it's the terms of reference under which that study was done and the assumptions under which it occurred. Several of those assumptions have changed. So technology has changed, the political landscape has changed, so the homelands are no longer homelands. And Gqeberha is one of the big changes that's taken place in that process. Will interested and affected parties be given a copy of that original missile so that we can check that out? Then the second, and the other question would be, is if I listen to the criteria in terms of your siting, to me the hydro substation, which is close to Gqeberha Dam, would seem to be a far better option than any of the other sightings that you've looked at. And why that? So to Andrea's question, why would that not be considered? It would seem logical that you find a place that's closest to the big power grid with a water supply, because you can use water cooling. Why would hydro not be that consideration as
an alternative?
As an alternative. And if you're going to place a small medium reactor here in Gqeberha, then the arguments that you've used in the Gqeberha argument no longer apply, because it is PWR technology, if I understand correctly. And so just in your scoping report, you refer to the Alexander Dunes. I don't know if you know, the Alexander Dunes are not part of Gqeberha. They are outside of Gqeberha. You talk about the lack of a cliff, or the cliff, and that kind of stuff. The rocky area, Gqeberha actually has that. So it would make it a suitable site for a nuclear reactor. So you just check your facts in terms of the scoping report. The Alexander Dunes are part of Sandparks, part of the Haddo thing. It's not part of Gqeberha. Then the impact, I think, is the second bunch of questions. You've excluded a whole bunch of things that are material to the project. So the construction village, the transmission lines, the roads, and a whole bunch of other things that will, if you don't get a positive EI on those, the project can't go ahead. The legislation allows you to do multiple EIAs at the same time. Why are you not doing multiple EIAs at the same time? And if you do this EIA first, there's no ways that the EIA for the transmission line can be done in an objective way, because you already have this massive investment here. How would you then have a fair process in it? And then the last set of questions goes around your technology choice. You seem to vacillate in terms of SMRs. SMRs are out of the window because they will only be developed too late, but they're included in your PPE. So if I look at the technology that you've listed there, you've got 13 models. 6 of those are PWR, and 7 of those are SMRs. So one of the SMRs there, and Sadiqa, when we had the discussion online, one of them is a helium gas coolant. There's nothing in your scoping exercise about helium gas. So if you're considering that as part of your PPE window, you must surely then consider the technology, the impact of that technology on that. And you can't, I think that one of the key concerns, and let me talk one of the key concerns, is that you authorized, the IRP authorizes you for 5,200 megawatts. You already have 4,000 megawatts authorized for Dana-Fontein. And so to emphasize Andrew's question is, why would you not start there? Why come here for 5,200? Because there's nothing that you have said in this that prevents you from doing all 5,200 at Tastepoint. So is there a commitment from Eskom that you will split it equally between the two sites, that you will do it in some way? And what assurance do local people have that you do 5,200 there? Thanks very much.
Right, that was a whole mouthful. Can you respond to the last question quickly, please?
Thanks, Gary. So the environmental authorization for Dana-Fontein is 4,000. The IRP is 5,200 megawatts for the country, and our intention is to build on both Dana-Fontein and Tastepoint. to split the technology equally between the two sites. We will not be able to meet the 2039 timeline by just constructing on one site, because you want to build them normally 18 months apart between your units. So the intention is that we would be building, we'd start in Dynfontein, and we'd also start at Tasman. There's a lot more work that needs to be done from an infrastructure point of view in Tasman that we also need to get ready to support with that. On that. So the intention is really that we will be constructing on both sides.
Can you also talk to the hydro substation? Why is that not considered as an alternative for the
So we don't have hydro. So maybe I'll just add to what's the hydro. The hydro substation. No, I have heard of Hydra, now that I hear that, but what is the question then related to it?
So in terms of your siting, you're looking for a siting that has the shortest transmission distance.
Okay.
You're looking for water, you're looking for remoteness. That site would seem to have all of that. Why not consider that site?
And it's close to the grid.
It's close to your main transmission line. Johannesburg, Cape Town grid line, which is the biggest power line. This is where this power will be excavated to.
It's on the very dam.
It's close to it. It's 100 k's away from there.
See what you could
Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't think it's a site that's been studied. But anything additional that we need to look at for the nuclear program would need years and years and years of studying in order for us to confirm that it is a suitable nuclear site. So I think that's maybe the first answer, but we will consider your question and find a more complete answer for that. So I don't have an answer. What was I supposed?
Maybe just in terms of initial siting studies. In terms of siting studies, we were looking at seawater cooling as the main cooling source for that. That's why we're not looking at inland applications. What is different though with coal to nuclear, what we're looking at is specific coal stations that's on river sites that would be suitable for doing that. And there's an SEA underway currently to deal with that. But that's for an SMR technology, which is smaller on what we're looking at.
I think the question about why not multiple EIAs at the same time.
So it is phased, and with all of the large infrastructure projects, there's an EIA for a plant, an EIA for the transmission lines. So with all of our large infrastructure projects, for example, let's use in Gqeberha, we got the EIA the authorization for the plant, and then we went and did the EIA for the road that went between the two sites. And we will have it phased. But Gary, I think the important thing is that no matter how it is phased, we need all the authorizations. So we need a water use license. There's a whole list of permits that we would be required to get and authorizations to have.
So, Madam, just make clear my point. My point is that in terms of EIAs, so when you write your scoping report, you use the PPE window in terms of citing, and you refer to European standards. That's for citing a nuclear project. It's not an EIA. An EIA is a sustainable development assessment. That's what you're assessing. You have certain rules in terms of how you do that. You can't predetermine the outcome. So that's what Andrea is warning you against. It's a predetermined outcome, and that's a fatal flaw in the exercise. The housing, the transmission line, the roads, those things are, if they are, the scale of your development here will predetermine the outcome of that. There's no ways that the new company is going to turn down your application for 100 kilometers of thing when it comes. It makes a lot more sense that you do all of those at the same time.
So the EIA specialist can
Okay. Is this working?
Yes, it's working.
Fully agree with you. The fact that we in our EIA, let's call it our boundary of assessment for purposes of illicit activities. does not include the listed activities themselves, etc. Do not include road infrastructure, the housing. However, not including them as part of these listed activities forming part of the EIA does not mean we're not including them in assessments. In other words, like for instance, the socio and the socio-economic assessments do look at influx, they do look at the housing requirements that are external and that will be through in an area where there would likely be an EIA required for the actual facility of housing. Similarly with roads. Roads from leading in from Gqeberha through to site, they are assessed as part of the EIA. And those mitigation requirements are also covered. Same with transmission. Transmission is not, we're not covering transmission in our EIA. However, we are looking at what are those risks. To the extent that we have at this stage the information available and that we will have available in the EIA phase. However, for us, and I mean, we've discussed this a number of times, and we've also, I think at previous meetings, there's such similar responses that our EIA, we would define specific requirements that need to be met in order for the activities to commence. And those would be, like for instance, requirements for if there are transmission requirements and the transmission EIA authorizations required, that they need to be in place. So that is what will be included if in our final EIA report in terms of what is required. That's the bottom line. Is this is a phased approach. I mean, this is a massive project, and you have to, by having certain phases and certain areas of specific focus, ultimately leading to the overall project. It's not a fatal flaw. I mean, we at this stage zoning in on one, but we're not glancing over other risks, and they will be reflected, and we will also point that out to the regulator as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to be clear in terms of what I'm talking about. So I prefaced everything by saying an EIA has to do certain things. This EIA will prejudice the subsequent EIAs that you're doing. That's the point I'm making.
I hear you.
That is the fatal flaw in those processes, not in this process. So what I'm saying to you is that there is no ways that you will stop a housing development if you already have approved a tastement. There's no ways that you will stop a transmission if you've already approved a tastement. There's no ways that the roads will not be built. And so if you're assessing it in the EIA already, why not just go the full hog and do EIAs for all of those? You're already doing the work. Because the outcome is not guaranteed in the assessment. The outcome is guaranteed in the EIA.
I think we also need to look at what also makes this a bit complicated. I mean, for instance, if we look at transmission is NTCSA, which is a separate company, so it's a separate applicant. So it adds a different sort of dynamic, and it's also about, because this is phased at this stage, what is currently the focus is information that is currently available for the area that's being assessed, and that is where that's what we've been appointed for by generation.
Okay, I'm going to move on. I think Gary also asked if the EEP is aware that 4 meetings took place between Eskom, Gqeberha Development Corporation, the mayor, the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro Mayor, the local business chamber, and then Gqeberha local municipality.
I think you actually made us aware of it in one of your correspondence. So, but we're independent. We run a process. If there are other engagements happening which is not within our scope or what we're busy doing, no. So you made us aware.
What is your concern about that?
I don't want it to become a dialogue, but just to be clear, because it's for the record, so the concern about that is that certain commitments have been made to the mayor, to Gqeberha, to the business chamber, to the Kocha municipality in terms of this specific project. And that goes down to the detail of 4,800 power PWR at a placement and a 400 megawatt SMR here. Now that's fundamental to the project, because the argument by your client, by the persons that have appointed you, is to argue that this site is not suitable for nuclear. But if you're placing an SMR here, it is suitable for nuclear. It might not be suitable for 1,200 or 4,800, but it is still suitable for.
Yeah.
So how do you get around?
I think what we can do at this stage is we can request that we also get access to information that was discussed, and we can have a look at it and see if it has any bearing on our process.
Those discussions. Those discussions fall outside of the ambit of the EIA. They were discussions that were held between Eskom and yeah. So those discussions fall outside of the ambit of the EIA. They're not part of our process. So I can't see how it would have relevance to include it in our process. It's external to us.
I can explain to you why. We do it now, we can do it later. I can explain to you now.
Okay, please do explain it.
So in terms of the relevance of that, you have a developer that is developing at the site. The public statements and commitments and strategy of that developer are part of that project. So you have a developer. So Gqeberha, you spoke about Eskom's mandate. That's why you don't do renewables, because you have a certain mandate. Now, in terms of those meetings, you've conveyed certain information to parties that reside within the impact zone of your project. That information that you conveyed is different to the information that you conveyed to the public, and is different to information that's been conveyed in other places. That's relevant to the argument, because what you're doing is that you're tailoring your suit to the audience that you have. That's not an EIA process. The EIA process is meant to be objective and look at all the things. And the critical point of that, what Steve is ignoring, is that you've committed in that to build an SMR at Gqeberha, which means that the site is suitable for that process.
Before the EIA.
Before that, no, your argument is that you can't use the site because of seismological. You've confused it with the Alexander sand dunes, but that's a different matter which can be sorted out in your EIA. But this site, we're saying this site, consider this site. Why are you not considering this site when you want to build an SMR here of 400 megawatts?
So Gary, I wasn't in the meetings and I haven't seen minutes from those meetings. My understanding from what was discussed about an SMR at Gqeberha is that the CDC said, why don't you build one here? That's my understanding. Yeah, that's my understanding. But Eskom is not being underhanded or otherwise about this. On a national platform, we're talking about the fact that we want to develop nuclear. We talk about the fact that our plan is to develop Danafontein and then Tailspunt, or a second site. And Tailspunt is further along than Bantamsklippend. And that has also been made very, very clear in minutes with the department that we have always said, or not always, we've said right from the beginning of this project, that Bantamsklippend is not as far down the line in terms of the nuclear safety installation license as Tailspunt is. Tailspunt has actually submitted the application. Bantamsklippend still got a lot of work to do, and I think that is in the scoping study. But I can go back and we can include a comment in terms of your question. But I don't think that it is that no communication should be happening with the municipalities. We've heard them raising the concern. Andrea visited site last week. Last time we did our EIA, we also invited people that were suspicious about nuclear safety to come and look at nuclear, see what a nuclear plant is, because if you don't understand, it makes you nervous. So I'm not seeing, and the consultants need to come into that, but I'm not seeing that there's a conflict of interest or that we're saying things. Eskom is very well aware they cannot do anything until they have an environmental authorization and they have a nuclear siting license as well as to operate a nuclear plant. There are many approvals that need to happen before we can move ahead with the site. And Eskom management is very, very well aware that that is the situation. So I'm not sure if they say that, you know, we need to get this EIA, these are discussions. I'm not in those discussions, but they are very well aware that they can't move forward without an environmental authorization and that we need to do this EIA process properly.
Were you answering the Dana Fontaine question? Sorry.
No, I was answering.
There's a Dana Fontaine and then also the siting report.
And that there was some commitment to CDC that we were going to build the SMR at Gqeberha. Which my understanding is it was requested, but...
No, Deirdre, that's what Sadiqa said in the meeting last week.
What, that we're going to build this SMR at Gqeberha? I don't recall that.
They were looking at that. They were looking at that.
We are still recording. I think it's important that we use the mics. Okay, so can we respond to the request? I think it was requested before the siting report. The concern is not about the age of the site, but the terms of reference and the assumptions around that, which is what Gary wants to have a look at.
So will that be...
Will it be made available?
That was made available in the last...
No, the summary of it was made
summary
available.
Report, because it was a collection of different reports that was put together and it was summarized into a document. And that was put made available online.
Higher had to be done to
get the full report.
By other parties. I think it has been released so sorry, I know everyone's going home now. A bad audience, I won't make it as a stand-up comment. So the point is that it's one of your founding documents. Your site safety plan is one of your other founding documents. Those documents inform the decision making, and the public should be given the opportunity to comment on that and see whether it aligns with how you see it. So can I just make one last comment? Is that when I look at your scoping study, you don't seem to have had a specialist around electricity markets or electricity generation. You've taken that from the developer, and will you do that in the thing? So there needs to be a discussion around baseload and variable systems, which is in there, but you go for a preference. There's not enough of an interrogation around that. And then around the nuclear industry itself, there's a lack of depth around the discussion around the nuclear industry. So for instance, you talk about 3 accidents. There have been thousands. So if you differentiate between accidents and incidents, so let me be clear, there's been thousands of events. In terms of accidents, there have been a substantial number of accidents, more than the 3 that are recorded. Kashtam is one of them, which is a level 5. That's not referred to in your thing. Kariaku, I can't get the Japanese right, but the site in Japan, not the Fukushima site. There are a whole bunch. That needs a bit more exploring, and so that people can understand what is the relative risk. You refer to risk in that thing in terms of human deaths, not in terms of cost, capital cost to projects, that kind of stuff. So you need a bit more fleshing out of your argument around the nuclear industry, and you need a bit more fleshing out around from an objective point of view, not from your developer point of view.
Noted. Yeah. I just want to make sure this the issue that you're talking around depth around accidents and incidents, does that relate specifically to risk and safety, or is there something else that I am missing?
Look, so in the nuclear industry, there's debate around your assessment of risk. What do you use for that? And very often the standard go-to is the inner scale from 1 to 7. But it's a logarithmic scale. It's not it's not a normal skill. So the public don't understand that the difference between 6 and 7 is almost double your risk. And so why those ones? And so for instance, you have the near miss in Blaise in France, which has very similar build circumstances to this plant. That's not mentioned in the report, but it only gets to a level 2 on the inner scale because they contained it, because there were certain things that worked in their favor. Now, if you're having a discussion on accidents, that has to be included for it to be a proper discussion on accidents.
Right, we've got that. Thank you, and I wanted that recorded so that we make sure that we are considering all those important issues. Are we done? Hot chocolates in the back. Andrea, any last issues from your side? Last comments? I know you said you still have a lot. Okay, 100%.
I'd just like to know who's going to fund the power station, and perhaps that goes for both of them, the Danafontein and I suppose it's nuclear 1 and 2. And then there's also the offshoot of that, so roads will be needed, facility services. That's going to be the taxpayer, I'm assuming. But can we have an answer to that? And Deirdre, you mentioned many years of studies needed in order to confirm that a site is viable for a nuclear power station. Can we have a number? Thanks. Of years.
I'm handing over to Eskom to respond.
Yeah, so Sadiq is saying 10 years at least, but let us come back to you on that process.
In the report, you say you're going to build a plant within 5 to 8 years. You're going to take longer to study the site than to build a plant.
We've already done on these sites some of the preliminary siting studies, the geohydraulics, the seismic analysis. That was part of the study that had gone into that. So we had already done a lot of the quite detailed studies in terms of looking at the rock foundations, the geohydraulics, and all of that information. So we understand the characterization of site. That is time intensive. Yeah. And that's what we're referring to. From a desktop analysis through to the final product, it does take a number of years, which is why the siting process is a longer process on that.
Just the funding.
Yeah, so the funding model is still to be determined. So like I said, there's many authorizations and things that need to be sorted. This is just one of many, and the funding model is still being talked about and looked at, and it's not yet, I don't yet have an answer for that.
Does that include the concern raised about the offshoots? The road?
Okay, no, so like I said, the example of Medupi is in those cases it was funded by the overall project and not by the taxpayer. Well, yeah, not by the taxpayer, but maybe by the electricity user. But so the major roads that were required and some of the infrastructure was funded by the project and then handed over back to the municipalities. And that's why I was cautious about saying it doesn't mean that we're solving every problem. It means that there is consideration of that and engagement on that. And it is not solely, if they build a road, for example, from Humansdorp to Oyster Bay, they would, it's the same example as Medupi. It would have to be funded by the project, or portions of it would have to be funded by the project. In the Ngula case, where we built the road, which was, I think it's 50 kilometers at least, from bottom side to top side, Eskom paid that in full and constructed it.
Thank you, Deirdre. You have one.
There's no one else.
No, there's not.
There's no one? No one else wants to make a comment.
So if I can just ask the EAP, in your scoping assessment around the housing, you know for a fact that the local authorities don't believe that there's enough potable water for an additional 10,000 people. So in terms of your study, in terms of your scoping report, you said that there will be 10,000 workers. What you don't cater for is families that come with those 10,000. And the local authorities, so our dams are 100% at this point in time. A week ago they were at 30%. So we have these high peaks and lows. We expect droughts and long period. We don't have enough water So, I mean, if Eskom can create water, it would get out of the energy business, because if you can create water, you'd be doing fantastically well. But you can't create water, and we can't build bigger dams in this area. So we have a restriction in terms of actual potable water for that community. So for the site, there's not an issue. You will do that through the ground wells and through your desalination. But for your workers, 15,000, let's assume with families, where will the water go? You know, so that's one of the things that your assessment. Not that I can find it, but
yeah. So the scoping report at this stage does not actually. So the scoping report does not actually look at, or does not reflect at this stage, what is going to be the water demand requirements on the village. Are you yes. No, sure, but we are scoping.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
But you will cover it in
water, yes. The demands will be covered. Steve?
Yeah, we have to look at it.
Yeah.
15,000 people.
Yeah, look, the envelope at this stage, Gary, I think it reflects, and it's 10,000, that's throughout, that's maximum. That's construction operation. There's a
It's 6.5.
6.5. There's a value of 6.5, and I've actually got it summarized. But anyways, it doesn't matter.
No.
Has it been assessed? Will it be assessed? But yeah, at EIA phase, we'll have to look at the demand, and can the demand be met? And how can it be met? Even if it, because I mean, if there's no resources available. Yeah.
That's a fact we can share with you.
Yeah.
Do you have information and document you can share?
You can go to the DWS and do
The demand management director.
You have to talk.
Yeah. So the Department of Water and Sanitation does have a demand management directorate. They should have the data, so please get in touch with them regarding water demand and future water demand in this area. Right, so can I check if there are any other last issues and comments? Except for the hot chocolate. Gary and Andrea, Duma, thank you very much. And to all our other participants, we really appreciate your time. We look forward to walking this road with you during this impact assessment. Please travel safe and keep warm. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to you mailed it the other day. No, I think it's just for point of clarity. Now, I mean, I noted the previous one on the gas.